Okay, so let's finish this up. And do we remember what we used to believe? So, can attitude alter memory? And Behm and McConnell did study this in 1970. So, here's the thing. Participants first reported their attitudes toward an issue. Then, some freely chose to write an essay arguing against that original position. Afterward, their attitude shifted toward the position they had argued. And then researchers asked, well, what did you believe before you wrote that essay? Participants actually tended to remember their original attitudes as more similar to the new ones than the ones they actually had. And again, it does fit dissonance, and the participants almost came across as like I've pretty much always thought this, even though it deviated from what they originally believed. But here's the thing: is it does maintain the perception of consistency, which our brains like. And so instead of experiencing the past me, what I originally believed, and then now again, which my attitude shifted after that essay, memory can be altered, and so the past me is consistent with what I believe now. Our memory is not a perfect recording. Again, our current beliefs do influence how we reconstruct past attitudes that we might have had. So people might think I've always thought this way. Well, maybe, maybe not. But the study does demonstrate systematic errors in recalling prior attitudes after counter-attitudinal behavior and attitude change, specifically. So sometimes we maintain consistency, not only by changing what we believe, but by remembering our past selves as more consistent with who we are now and not then. So this raises something even more bizarre. Do we have to consciously remember the choice for dissonance related or change to occur? Okay, this gets into some of Lieberman's studies in regard to amnesic patients. So here's the thing, is they made choices between items that they later couldn't explicitly remember which they chose. Okay, so they chose items that they later couldn't remember that they actually chose, but their preferences still shifted in that they had a preference for the item that they chose in comparison to the one that they didn't. And this is interesting because this can't just be conscious because again, these people have amnesia. So here's another piece here. Cognitive load research. Participants make decisions while their attention is occupied and working and memory is still tasked. And what they find is still preference changed followed choice. And so this suggests that some consistency restoring processes might happen without extensive deliberate reasoning. And so it's more automaticity and unconscious in nature. Our behavior is influenced without our full awareness. These judgments and attitudes do rely on automatic processes to a certain degree. And even when we justify our choices or what we believe, it involves processes we're not fully aware of. So this cognitive dissonance can certainly involve conscious discomfort, like we can feel it, and rationalization. But evidence does suggest that some of the resulting preference changes. It doesn't require explicit memory or actual conscious reasoning. Now, we often experience that I know why I believe this, but some of the processes that create that belief might be outside of what we're aware of. So we can experience our preferences as obvious and conscious, even when our own previous choices helped actually create them. So, what happens when new information threatens something we already believe? Again, that's where this psychological phenomena starts interacting with another process we've already encountered, which is confirmation bias. We have revisited this several times. And that, yes, once we hold a belief, we tend to seek information that supports it, notice evidence that's consistent with it, interpret ambiguous information in its favor, and remember supporting evidence more readily than anything else. So why might we be motivated to do this? Based upon what we learned in this chapter. Any new evidence that we might come across might indicate that we might be wrong and create cognitive dissonance, threatening existing attitudes, choices that we've made, how we see ourselves. Okay, so example, I made the right choice buying this car. That's what I believe. And so I seek out a review. Yep, it looks awesome. It got a 5 out of 5 star review. Negative review? That guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And again, so it's a different scrutiny depending on the conclusion. Okay, there is a difference here. This bias is how we process the information. We seek out certain information. The cognitive dissonance is like the discomfort and motivation that comes from the inconsistency. They can reinforce one another. The dissonance drives us to not want the inconsistency, and the confirmation bias can help basically look for the information showing I was right. So we don't necessarily evaluate evidence with the same skepticism when it tells us, oh, apologies, conversions are happening. Um, when it tells us what we already want to believe. And this resistance can become even stronger when the belief isn't just what I think, when it has to do with who I am, when it's part of my identity. So all attitudes are not equal, like we talked about at the beginning. So like thinking like, okay, this restaurant's pretty good. Fine, whatever, not a big deal. I can admit like the last meal wasn't great. That's in comparison to identity linked beliefs like morality, worldview, your profession, your group affiliation, deeply held values, religion. So now changing attitudes might imply like my group was wrong, people I trust were wrong, what I believe about existence is wrong, I was wrong. There's a much higher psychological cost. And so this leads to motivated reasoning, and that we aren't always motivated only to ask like what's true. Sometimes competing motivation might occur in that like, can I continue believing what I want to believe? Or can I reach a conclusion consistent with my identity? And it's important to note that this doesn't mean people consciously manipulate evidence. The reasoning can feel sincere. But with cognitive dissonance, if the belief is tied to how I see myself as a human, that contradiction can create stronger inconsistency. So I believe whatever it might be becomes I am the kind of person who believes so and so. So now changing whatever that belief is might actually feel like changing me. So changing a belief can be very psychologically expensive when it's carrying more than information and it's carrying part of my identity. And so this does help to explain, again, something that seems strange or bizarre, possibly, but something sometimes simply giving someone more facts doesn't change their mind. Here's how we get here. Because again, we assume more evidence, more persuasion. But again, evidence is going to be interpreted through what we believe, how much we trust the source, identity, motivation, what we've already committed to. So when evidence threatens an important belief, especially when it's tied to our identity, we might question the source, come up with counter arguments, look for other explanations, find a way to defend what we already believe. Yes, the information matters, but it's not processed in a psychological vacuum. If it is tied to our identity, we will find scapegoats. We will ignore everything. Please think about this in the context of everything that's happening right now and how hard it is to for some people to see what's happening in front of their eyes. That's all I will say. So, again, what can help people reconsider? We've talked about some of these things. Don't corner them, don't demand. That gets back to reactance. Ask them, what do you think? What are you willing to consider? Don't tell them they're wrong because ask them what evidence would change their mind or how did you reach that conclusion. It's not overly threatening. People can admit, like, I might have been wrong about this without saying, like, I'm stupid, decreases the overall threat. Build trust. Credibility matters. If the source isn't trusted, it's not going to change the problem. You have to find shared values. I think that I'm not sounding too positive on the first four, and I'm not. I'm not because I've seen that these are not working right now. Values to a certain degree. I do think that everybody has to share the same level of suffering almost in order to come together to create change. Sounds very dark. That's where I'm at. If you've gotten this far into my lecture series and you just heard that, congrats. You know how I feel about society now. And yeah, there's change in face saving as well. So, this is just an activity if you would like to go through it. In which dissonance process is it? You can pause it and go through it if you would like. And then finally, we have the overview and we have class one. We went over changing other people's mind and all of the different types of persuasion and what it requires and how we can resist it. Then we have changing our own minds and how we seek consistency and then what happens when inconsistency occurs and how that can motivate us in a variety of ways to behave differently. And here's the thing, others persuade us and sometimes we persuade ourselves as well. And really changing our mind is not evidence that thinking has failed. It's merely sometimes evidence that thinking actually worked. What a thought. With that, we will wrap this up here. If you've made it this far again, thanks so much for watching and listening to this. Have a great day, and I will see you next week.